experience where suddenly I saw wonderful beauty and joy in the world, and saw everything was evolving towards something wonderful, and a real sort of rebirth and awakening. And that basically started my journey of psychosynthesis. I wanted to find a psychology that talked about this kind of experience. I didn't want to go, I thought about going the religious route. I didn't know much about religion. How do you do that? You major in Zen Buddhism and minor in Roman Catholicism. So how do you do that? But what became clear to me was I wanted to talk about and describe and more importantly, share this experience, share this reality with the world. And what the world, the culture understood was science. Within science, psychology would be speaking to this, ergo, where is the spiritual psychology? So in 1968, I started looking for the spiritual psychology. 2 years later, saw the egg diagram. But to say something about that sort of down and then that up, sort of a bipolar swing. In the old days, I would think of that as a movement through to get to, a movement through the darkness to get to the light. And within psychosynthesis theory back then, you've gone into the lower unconscious and moved into the higher unconscious. And the way I understand it today, and the way we talk about this kind of dynamic, is that it is an expansion of the middle unconscious. So it's not that I'm going from the bottom of the egg to the top of the egg, which is the way it was understood back then. It's what's happening is my experiential range, my ability to engage grief and pain has expanded, and my ability to experience love and joy has expanded. So my experiential range, my middle unconscious, has expanded. And that today is how we understand that kind of dynamic. It's not that I'm going to the darkness to get the light. It's the process seems to be simply an expansion of an experiential range. So for us, for instance, without being too theoretical, we're doing that. We can do some of that tomorrow. But the middle unconscious used to be, well, that's where your phone number is, or that's where things are that you can recall, right? Well, it's being revealed much more as the realm of implicit memory, the realm of what we have learned to be able to respond to. It's our doors of perception. It's in the middle unconscious. It's supporting your ongoing function, your ongoing awareness. So an expanded middle unconscious can be, I can be aware of love and joy as it occurs right in this room. Or if I have an expanded middle unconscious and the lower unconscious, I can be aware of when people are being hurt or the suffering around me. So that's today how I understand that kind of, that dynamic. And bless his heart though, when I fell off of that high and then stumbled across Roberto's self-realization and psychological disturbances, chapter 2 in his Psychosynthesis book, where it says, oh yeah, you'll have a high and then there'll be this falling off. It was tremendous validation, tremendous holding. So jump forward. I joined this institute. I discovered these people who wanted to do this thing, some of whom are in this room. And there what happened to me, there's many ways of talking about this. This is, those of you who don't know, this is a San Francisco group of the 70s, from what 71 to 80 or something, that became cultish, imploded, blew up, hurt people. What I want to talk about in there, in the theory, as well as my own experience, is I thought I had a higher self then. I thought that there was this higher self, this soul, somewhere around, that I was supposed to become. And that was what my job was. That's what I'm trying to do. I was trying to go up the dotted line and get to this thing. I was never very good at a rope climb. And part of what was happening to me in that group was trying to be this higher self. Are you being your higher self? Well, I'm not sure. I don't feel very good. And I would feel, how can I be feeling depressed? And I was walking around, I was feeling depressed. What are you doing? Your higher self's not depressed. So, ergo, you're not being your higher self. Ergo, there's a part of you resisting. So, that depressed part of you is keeping you from being who you are, being big, being this glorious self, this higher self, this soul that's there. How could you? And it became the depression, that darkness became sort of demonized, as it's something that's keeping me from being who I am. It's not who I really am. This is higher self. And we've since written about this as transpersonal identity disorder. It's where you're trying to develop an identity that's sort of based on the higher conscious. That's really what it is. So your higher self is really this enlightened being that you're trying to be. Just identify with your higher self. Identify with your higher self. Couldn't do it. More and more depressed. I remember teaching a class on evolution, at the graduate school, and there wasn't a student in there at the end who wanted to evolve. Go forward and become one, but that's how my energy was. So I was asked to be in quarantine, so I was sort of, because I couldn't quite control my energy. And this happens to a lot of us. You can ask others, but the point is that today, as Ann and I have worked with psychosynthesis and looked at it in the light of our work with clients, also with ourselves as well, there is no higher self. There is no higher self in us. So we can talk about that tomorrow with the round table. But there is you, there is I, there is human spirit, who by your very nature is distinctly not separate from the experience. So you are fully incarnate. You don't have to ground yourself. You're here. We don't know it. That's true, very often. But in terms of psychosynthesis theory, you are I. You always will be I. That's your spiritual essence. And, according to Jolie, that's a direct reflection of what we say is universal spirit. So basically there's me, there's God. There's not this other place that I'm supposed to get to. Now there is some transformation that takes place as I relate to that self. We say self, capital S, self. Meaning what Jolie would say, universal self in active will. it's one that you could hear say, take your grandmother home, come to you very personally, inwardly. But that same self can create synchronicities, can let you hear messages, to you from other people or events. So it's not just inside this self. But a key point is that we don't become something other. We become more of who we are. So there really isn't a higher self as we've developed it. I mean, one of the beauties of the chaos of psychosynthesis is we get to develop it as we want to. So there's no, as Assagioli himself said, there's no orthodoxy in psychosynthesis, including me. So, but this is the way Ann and I have moved with it. It's very much about having a deeper relationship with all of who we are and with spirit. And the experience of that has to do with call and direction. You can say it with a client, it's following the person's truth, following their bliss, and Bill Campbell's idea. So that's what happened to me in 1980, amongst other things. When did I come out of quarantine? I don't think until AAP was born. At Concord what year was that? 94. Tom's Concord Institute. We all laughed as I was going to do my first presentation after all this time, and I finally come out of quarantine. But part of this was, as I disengaged from this group, blessings on them, wherever they may be, was beginning to reconnect with people. I've been in quarantine, I've been in this group as it left San Francisco, and people know the story. San Francisco, Washington, D.C., we went to Atlanta, we went to Macon, Georgia, and then finally in '84, that was by. I mean, kept waiting for Synthesis 5. I kept waiting for the next piece to happen, and it was not going to happen, so I had to go off and do something else. Keep writing. And as part of that, I began revisiting old friends and driving a truck at the time. That's another story. That's another journey. One of my transition was driving a tractor trailer cross country where I could go, and I visited people like I showed up. Got to tell us. We didn't plan to tell them. So I basically been in quarantine. People haven't seen me. I've been out of touch, and now I'm driving this truck, so I can go wherever I want. I can call my dispatcher and they tell me where to go. Okay, we got a ride going to Boston. Okay, so we're going to Boston. Call up Tom and Ann. And they came out and saw the truck, and here them ran up and down inside the truck, and they said, you know what's happening right now? Tonight, Mark Horowitz is giving a seminar, a psychosynthesis seminar at this place. And of course, Mark's one of those, and I didn't see him for 6 years. So I just walked into his seminar and said, hi, Mark, back. So I enjoyed that part of coming out of it. And I dropped by in Minnesota. I came to Minneapolis, St. Paul several times in blizzards, which I'm not crazy about being a California boy. But dropped by and saw them, Road 11, now Rachel Freed. And so I was here as part of my re-engagement. And then, lo and behold, I decided I would drop in on my old friend, Ann Russell, who I was with sort of in the 70s, in the early 70s, we had a fling in the 70s. So we've known each other a long time. But this thing, I decided to go and drop in on her in the same way. And you asked me the other day, why did I do that? Again, see, I'm thinking, I don't know, that they guess is somehow, hey, it'll be fun to see Ann. So I come in and knock on Ann's door in 1987.
Yeah. So we had not seen each other for 8 or 9 years. And John came and knocked on my door, and we ended up spending the next 2 or 3 days just talking about our journeys over those 8 or 9 years. And amazed to find that we had been exploring some of the same things, reading some of the same books.
We're married now.
And so one of the things I was telling John during that time was my journey for those 7 or 8 years, which involved my becoming more aware of the abuses that had been part of my family system. And in particular, the sexual abuses that had been part of my family system. When I was growing up as a young teenager, or late teenager, early 20s, I knew that I had not felt very good as a person, and often thought about suicide, though I would never have tried it. But knew I didn't want to be alive. And I knew my family was not the greatest, but I didn't know the extent of the abuses that existed in my family at that time. So it was a little hard for me to explain to myself why I felt so awful. So during those 7 or 8, 9 years when we were out of touch, during that time I had decided to go back into therapy, and I started seeing a psychiatrist in San Francisco. And
Name?
Arthur Dyckman. And one of the gifts that Arthur Dyckman gave me a very big gift. For me, he has been a teacher in terms of what it means to be a therapist. There's several other people, but he was one of them. And he was willing to sit with me, no matter what I wanted to do, say, think, not talk, whatever it was. He had no agenda for me. And I remember when I walked into his office, he asked me why I was there, and I said there were 2 reasons I was there. One was that I felt like I was living in 2 realities, but I didn't even know what that meant. And the second was that I felt like there was something I needed to get to the bottom of, and I didn't know what that meant either. And I said that I had worked in therapy a lot, and I had been doing all this exploration in various kinds of therapy, including psychosynthesis, gestalt, and other things. Psychodrama, everything, stuff of the 60s and 70s. And I said people had even mentioned or suggested to me that, well, maybe this is past life stuff. And he said to me, he looked directly at me, and he said, something's happened to you probably in this life, so let's just be with whatever arises, or something like that. And I remember how validated I felt when he said that to me. That he, based on the pain I guess I was expressing to him, that he could say that maybe there was something to know. And I just felt incredibly validated by his statement. Well, I was seeing him for about maybe a year. One day I was sitting in his office, and I was sitting in silence. There was nothing I was saying, and he didn't require that I say anything. But after about 15 minutes, he asked me if I was willing to share what was going through my mind. And I said, yes. I said, well, they're crazy thoughts. And he said, well, that's fine. Are you still willing to share the crazy thoughts? And I said, sure. So the crazy thoughts had to do with a number of things, thoughts or ideas of incest and sexual abuse in my family. And so he allowed me to say them, and he said, you don't have to believe or not believe, but you can just hold that that's what's there for you right now. And that was the beginning of a journey for me. I ended up talking to a lot of family members, another family quest here, search. I ended up talking to a lot of family members and discovering the level of sexual abuse that was in my family that I had not been conscious of, that I had been exhibiting through feelings, emotions, behaviors, etc.
A lot of it coming from the husband of the grandmother that you took home.
Yeah. And so that was a real big journey for me during that time. I ended up going to incest groups. I ended up going back into therapy with someone who worked primarily with incest survivors. I did a lot of that work during that time. It's a very healing time for me. And that actually exploration continues to this day. But, so John and I were talking when we reconnected that weekend.
We have these light chats when we get together, talking about superficial things.
I think it's true, we cannot talk about superficial things.
We're going to learn.
So I was telling him about what I was learning about my family and myself and my history and what I was doing. And he was sharing some of the similar things in terms of his inner experience, the anguish, the pain that he experienced in himself. And I said to him, I knew a little bit about his family, not very much, but I knew a little bit about it. And I said, how could you feel those things? Your family is so, looks so good. They loved him. It was a family that was admired in the community. Everybody wanted John's parents as his parents, as their parents. People of his college roommates would come home and want to live with his parents. I mean, how could...
All my girlfriends wanted to stay there.
Yeah.
I'd break up with them and they'd end up in the house with my parents.
So how could you feel the same thing that I feel? I know why. I'm learning why I feel the way I feel. How come you feel this way? Well, as we began to talk and as he, told me about his exploration, I don't know if you want to continue this part yourself, but and then he was beginning to recognize that he had grown up in an alcoholic family. It was a very functional alcoholic family. It was a very professional alcoholic family. It was great. Everybody in the community loved it, but it was an alcoholic family.
It was almost like it was a family that was addicted to social drinking, if that makes sense. There's no hitting bottom, there's no lost time, but there's this alcohol as another being in the family almost, and a lot of the bonding going to the alcohol itself, leaving the child mysteriously feeling abandoned when everything looks great, So it's an interesting sort of level of alcohol addiction that doesn't really get into the literature that much.
So as we continued talking, John was living in LA at the time. We spent weekends traveling back and up and down the coast of California, spending weekends and weekends and weekends talking about ourselves, reading books. I mean, all we did on weekends was go to bookstores and sit and read, and talk. This was
A fun couple.
And for me, what came up was, where is this in psychosynthesis? This wasn't in the psychosynthesis I learned. This level of wounding, this level of whatever I was uncovering. This wasn't in the psychosynthesis I learned.
And it's pretty hidden in other psychology too, especially at that time.
So I started going to a 12-step program for incest survivors. John joined me sometimes as what they call a pro-survivor, someone who was supporting someone who was an incest survivor. He came to that first meeting with me as a pro-survivor, and he actually walked out as an incest survivor, remembering in that meeting his own sexual abuse by a neighborhood boy.
Which again, that's a function of what we call an authentic unifying center. Assagioli's notion of a unifying center being a conduit for self, for spirit. So those kinds of groups, and also I began looking at my own alcoholism, very similar to my parents' alcoholism, and so I went to AA and I'm not supposed to say this, but went to a 12-step group and sort of stopped drinking. So.
Right. So out of that, as we talked about all of this, John remembered having sat with Assagioli back in the 70s and having drawn a diagram as he and Assagioli were talking about.
What he calls it is the psychosynthesis of the ages. Some of you are familiar with that. In which he was describing that you don't kill the child in you or the adolescent or any of those levels, and you include each of those as you grow. Ergo, the psychosynthesis of the ages. And I started drawing this little diagram like this. So that's what I uncovered when I sort of went back to my notes thinking about times with Assagioli, and we came up with this, what a developmental model basically for psychosynthesis. So one approach to development is the psychosynthesis of the ages. This model that contains what we were calling primal wounding, meaning the break of the primal connection between us and God, or us and the universal spirit. That's what the primal wound is. It breaks that primary connection and throws us into numbing, throws us into annihilation.
And that primary connection is broken when we are treated as objects. So when we're treated as objects. So when in Martin Buber's term, when we're treated as an it rather than a thou, and when you're getting abused, you're very much being treated as an it. So out of that came our book, The Primal Wound, became the ring model which we developed, and that developed into the book, The Primal Wound.
And it took some of the pressure off of, as we've gone on, we sort of recognize there's personality theory, developmental theory, and clinical theory, sort of three fields of theory of the psychological system. And one of the things that had been going on is that the egg diagram had been sort of pressed into service as a developmental model. So that's where you got, well, you go up the dotted line. And Assagioli never thought of it as really a developmental model. He said this is anatomy. So the egg diagram is really personality theory. And the psychosynthesis of the ages is a developmental. So, and an important aspect of that is that puts psychosynthesis very much in relationship to relational psychoanalysis, object relations, self-psychology, intersubjective psychology, a lot of the neuroscience that's going on now, attachment theory. I mean, it shows that psychosynthesis has something tremendous to connect to, that we're talking about those same things only from the spiritual point of view. We can see it has to do with the universal spirit, where maybe Winnicott, Kohut, and people like that don't go that far. So yes, that became The Primal Wound, the book. And what we began to realize is that since that break, that being treated as an object, that primal wound, the other thing that was happening to us was we realized our clients who kept bringing this to us. That this level of wounding was very much emerging in our clients behind every addiction. Well, why don't you, how would you feel if you gave up your dependency on this abusive relationship? I feel lost, alone, like I don't exist. There's no, any kind of compulsive pattern, any kind of structure that's a problem, you will find this wound underneath it. So, given that there's this break, this empathic break, this being treated as an object rather than as a thou, it's causing all this turmoil. What is, quote, the cure for that? Only one thing could be a reestablishment of empathy, a reestablishment of that bond, which is described very well by Assagioli. That's what an external unifying center is. It's a conduit for spirit. So, spiritual empathy, seeing the other as a thou, as a spiritual being, distinct but not separate from their experience, and getting out of all the roles that we fall into, like to fix a person, or to use the technique, or to make the person enlightened, or all of those things. This has become the real focus of psychosynthesis therapy as we understand it. That far more than any kind of technique is the therapists themselves be willing to look continually at what is causing empathic failures. And again, there's lots of resonances with other fields of psychology around us. So, spiritual empathy, this way of being, again, that's what I reconnected with Pastor Billy. When I was 3 years ago, I realized that that is how he was. That there was a way he was with me, and I think with others, but they have to speak for themselves, in which I felt held, seen, understood, not violated. I didn't have to protect myself from him. I didn't have to worry about him trying to fix me. There was a way I felt the experience of him sort of being in my world while I'm looking at my world. It's almost like another presence with you as you're looking at your own inner experience. So as subtle as a whisper, as quiet as a thought, someone there looking without judging, without, he's going to do something with it now. He's going to, no, he's there. And that empowers my essence, that empowers my I amness to awaken and to explore. And when I was with him, I mean, yeah, he would do things. He would do, he'd talk about stuff and weird stuff sometimes. Have to do free drawings and techniques. But simply being with him, I was going through more process than I'd ever seen, both higher and lower. I was grieving my brother again, just being with him. That was on the train going to California. That wasn't even getting to him yet. So there was something about the way he was with me, with us, that expanded again, goes back to that middle unconscious idea. My range, it's not that I got wonderfully high. It is, I did have that, and I had that, and I had that, and I had that. So both of those things. So there's something about spiritual empathy, pure, this way of being, which it takes a tremendous amount of work on the part of the therapist to keep the parts of us who want to do something, who feel responsible, or who have to use a technique, or and it's not that any of that's not okay. It's just that the hard part is that it has to come from the world of the client. I have to understand. Pastor Jolie says it somewhere. You understand that their world makes sense from their point of view. Am I there? Yeah, I'm empathetic with you, and if you just thought about it this way, then you feel better. No, that's an empathic failure. That blocks that flow, that reconnection of spirit. So this way of working really puts the therapist back on their own journey, which is something, Psychosynthesis has always said, that you have to walk your own journey to walk the journey with the client. So spiritual empathy.